I call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, May 9th, 2024. All managers are present except Manager Hejmati, who could not be here but is participating or observing remotely. I see no members of the public. Are you here for a matter other than what's on the agenda? Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Approval.
I'll take motion from Manager Maxwell, second from Manager Miller. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I've got to announce that I will not be participating in the discussion or voting on the Walser permit. I got a personal relationship with Andrew Walser.
Okay.
He's a neighbor and a lifelong friend of our family, so.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Thank you to Ms. Johnson for including the Q1 financial report as an information item. On the consent agenda, we have approval of the minutes of the April 25th meeting and approval of one resolution, 24029, which is the Citizens Advisory Committee member appointment adjustment. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move approval.
I'll take a motion for Manager Olson and a second from Manager Miller. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Under updates, I didn't have a meeting, but I did attend earlier this week the State of the City for the City of Minnetrista, just as a way of supporting our partners. No content to report. Manager Loftus, can you report on Operations and Programs Committee?
Yes, thank you, President White. We had one agenda item tonight, the 2025 budget, and we focused mainly on broad brush strokes. Everything is looking good. Our staff does amazing zero-based budgeting, and our levy is looking good as well. We have the next couple months to kind of dive a little deeper into our capital program and our reserves, and so we'll be doing that as a board and staff. And then we have a whole program that culminates in August, September, and November with public input on our budget process. So we'd welcome anyone interested to participate in that. And that was our one agenda item.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Manager Miller, you had something you want to report?
Yes, James and I attended a meeting with the Mill Pond Association in Edina at the request of Mike Sullivan, the chairman, and Mayor Hovland. And we had a very good discussion about the current condition of the mill pond and what possible improvements can be made in the future with partnering with the city and perhaps the highway department. And it's a very well organized neighborhood group that is a pretty sophisticated group of people that but they were very pleased that we had no plans to take out the mill pond dam, which was about the last thing we were thinking about. But they got other issues that need to be addressed that the city and the other parties will be dealing with over the years.
All right, well, thank you very much. Any other meetings or events to report on? We will then move to item 10.1, which is a permit. Mr. Jonas has 24053.
Good evening, President White, Board of Managers. Tonight I will be providing a briefing on permit 24053, the Walser Kia development, located at 15700 and 15724 Wayzata Boulevard within the city of Minnetonka. I'll note up front that the city of Minnetonka is the rule authority for erosion control, stormwater management, floodplain alteration, and is also the local governing unit for the Wetland Conservation Act. So the only MCWD rule that applies to this project is the Wetland Protection Rule. This presentation is before you tonight because the applicant is requesting an exception from the minimum buffer width provision of the district's Wetland Protection Rule. To offset this, the applicants are proposing an additional 0.39 acres of buffer area and an enhanced buffer planting plan. District staff and engineers have reviewed the plan and are recommending approval of the exception this evening. I will also note that Ms. Gretchen Schroeder is in attendance tonight from Westwood DPS as a representative of the project and is available for any questions at the end of the presentation. This presentation will provide an overview of the project, including the project location and proposed development, and then as well as the rule compliance summary and then the exception request. The presentation will end in time for questions and discussion before board deliberation. So here we have the project location. The yellow icon on the map is the project location in relation to the entire district. As you can see, the project sits within the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed. And then this map shows a more close-up image of the project area highlighted in yellow. The project sits in the northwest of Minnetonka on a frontage road adjacent to Highway 12, and it's just south of a large wetland complex downstream of Gleason Lake. The site primarily drains to ditches and wetlands located east and west of the existing building. The south portion of the parking lot then drains to an existing catch basin, which further flows via storm pipe to the eastern ditch. The eastern ditch then flows south below Highway 12 towards Linner Park, eventually draining to Minnehaha Creek. So this is a closer view of the existing conditions on the left and then the proposed development on the right. Currently, there is one existing commercial building and then in the northern portion of the lot is undeveloped there. The existing commercial building will be torn down and a new parking lot and car dealership building will be constructed. Parking ramp on the northern side of the parcel will be is proposed, and a new access drive to connect the north and south portions of the parcel is proposed, as seen on the figure on the right. And I'll note that the access drive is the location of the buffer width shortage. So now that we've looked at the project location within the district and the proposed development of the site, I'll review the project through the lens of the Wetland Protection Rule. The subject parcel contains delineated wetlands. Westwood DPS conducted a wetland delineation and MinRAM assessment on July 22nd, 2023. The report identified a 4.96 acre type 2, 3, 4, and 6 wetland and classified the wetland as a managed 2. The district's wetland protection rule requires that buffers are established around all down gradient wetlands with the width determined by the management class. In this case, the managed 2 wetland classification requires a 30-foot buffer with a 15-foot minimum when they're using buffer averaging. The rule also requires that buffer signs are installed and that disturbed buffer areas have a planting and maintenance plan. The applicant has submitted plans that meet all the requirements of the wetland protection rule outside of the required minimum buffer width in the areas adjacent to the proposed access road. In this location, the minimum 15-foot buffer width is unable to be met. The board is being asked to consider an exception to these wetland buffer requirements on the basis that they're proposing to offset the lost function and value of the impacted wetland buffer. So now we've reviewed the geography of the project area, summarized the wetland protection rule, and then in this next section of the presentation, I'll be reviewing the applicant's exception proposal to achieve greater natural resource outcomes. And as a reminder, the district's exception rule allows the Board of Managers to grant an exception from a provision of the rule based on the determination that the proposed plan will achieve an equal or greater degree of water resource protection than that of strict compliance with the rule provision. So, as I mentioned, the applicant has requested an exception from the buffer minimum width required by the Wetland Protection Rule based on multiple site constraints. First is that strict compliance with the rule would leave the northern portion of the site unbuildable. And then the next factor is that the plan is designed to not permanently impact any wetlands and to minimize any temporary wetland disturbance. So this figure shows what a compliant buffer would look like. In the blue, you see the 30-foot buffer, and the required area of that is 1.99 acres. The plans also show a buffer shortfall in that area, as you can see circled in red, and then kind of the red hatching there. That has a buffer area shortfall of 2,887 square feet. And then specifically on the west side of the drive, a length of 140 feet has a buffer shortage. 90 of those feet have a width of half a foot of buffer, while the remaining length gradually expands to the full buffer width. On the east side of the road, a length of 50 feet has a buffer shortage, with 20 of those feet having a width of half a foot, and the remaining length gradually expanding to the full buffer width. The applicant proposes to offset the lost habitat and water quality functions of the buffer width shortfall by adding buffer area and implementing an enhanced planting plan of the buffer. So with that in mind, here's the proposed condition. As seen in green, the buffer is upsized to an area of 2.38 acres, creating an additional 0.39 acres of additional buffer area. In addition to the added buffer square footage, the applicant is also proposing to plant 100 native trees in the buffer area along with native shrubs and a Mesic prairie seed mix. These shrubs and trees will bring vertical structure, bird nesting, terrestrial habitat, and pollinator habitat. Additionally, the increasing of the diversity of native species within a planted buffer will increase its resilience to environmental stressors and reduce the occurrence of non-native species that may require maintenance disturbance. The additional 100 native trees within the buffer area will provide 524 cubic feet of stormwater volume reduction, and the additional 0.39 acres of wetland buffer will provide an additional 0.2 pounds of total phosphorus reduction per year. With that, staff finds that the proposed planting plan will increase the volume and diversity of plant composition within the wetland buffer beyond that which would be achieved through standard seeding plan required under the rule. Additionally, in consultation with the district engineer, staff have found that the proposed plan's water quality function exceeds that of a conforming buffer. So with that, staff and the district engineer have evaluated the exception to the wetland buffer provisions by looking at the replaced ecological and water quality functions of the proposal and find that the applicant has provided sufficient evidence that the proposed project will achieve a greater degree of water resource protection than would strict compliance with the rule. Staff recommends the approval of the permit application with the conditions listed at the beginning of the report. So thank you, President White, Board of Managers, for listening to this briefing on permit 24053 and the applicant's exception request and proposal. I'll now open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. Is there a motion to approve the exception? Manager Loftus, second from Manager Sando. Discussion, questions, observations. Manager Olson.
Quick question.
Yep.
The two buildings, do you know what the function of each one of them, what's the purpose of?
Yes, Manager Olson, thank you. The building on the south side of the parcel is the car dealership building, the main building. And the building on the north side is going to be a parking ramp.
Just a parking ramp?
Yes, and maybe Ms. Schroeder can provide additional context for the project there. Or?
Per City of Minnetonka codes out there. I'm Justin Higgins with Walzer Automotive Group, Director of Construction. Per City of Minnetonka building ordinance is they have a car ratio to square footage area of 1 parking stall per 200 square feet of building.
Okay.
If you're over that, it needs to be in a structured parking, which structured parking is the parking ramp that we're proposing. So to meet the amount of cars needed for the viable business, a parking ramp was proposed with our planning commission submission to the city council as well.
Okay, so that's just car storage or parking?
Yep, employees on the top and then inventory and.
Okay. And then, so service, if I were to take my car in for service, where would that be out by the highway?
The drop off for service would be within the building on the front.
Okay.
And then a vehicle and Walzer employee runner would take the vehicle in either, there's I think 60 stalls on the front half.
Mm-hmm.
By general rule, the runner would take that car to the parking ramp on first or second and third floor with employees on fourth.
Okay, so the public isn't going back to that ramp, the
We would
staff?
limit it to employees only. If we're going to protect it with fencing or a gate, we don't know at this point yet, but it would be designated for employees only to not have public back there.
Great, thank you, appreciate it.
Has it gone through the whole Minnetonka process?
Yes, we have city council approval as of February.
Oh, it's been that, okay. And what you talked about snow removal, you're gonna, because you can't push in the buffer areas.
Yeah, it would be stores on the ramp as much as possible, and then it would be, there'll be a snow push wall on the east side where there is the infiltration pond on the east side, and it would go into there. Buffer areas are tight down the west and north, but the snow removal would be over or going into kind of pond area would be the initial snow removal.
And how about gasoline, is it underground tank or overhead tank, or are you doing your own gas?
Gas on site. If anything, it would be above ground. Typically, a store of this size would not have on-site gasoline, but it would be not under the ramp. The space is limited to have that opportunity.
That's what I was kind of wondering where you're gonna put it, was it underground or that just for,
A default, I mean, I would say it would be a
Least
stretch
purchase
to have
on.
one.
yeah, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
No.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then moving on to the.
One abstention.
Be sure and record me as not voting.
Thank you, Manager Miller. So then, our next action here is to look at the permit with the conditions stated and the exception. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Manager Olson moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando seconds. Any questions at this point? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Manager Miller abstained on the second vote also.
Oh, I didn't, on the, is that on the Walzer?
Yes.
No, I didn't vote.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying. Next item for under consideration is Resolution 24030, formalizing the district's exercise of regulatory authority within the city of Chanhassen. Ms. Mandan presenting.
Good evening, President White and Board of Managers. I'm here to recommend that the board formalizes the district's regulatory authority within the city of Chanhassen. I'll go over the historical context, the city's request, staff recommendation, and have time at the end for questions. The city of Chanhassen covers roughly 24 square miles, only 5 of which are within the district's boundaries. Chanhassen falls within 4 different water management organizations and faces the challenge of aligning their ordinances with each of those. In 2018, Chanhassen amended its local water management plan and submitted for district review and approval. This included the city's desire to continue exercising sole regulatory authority. The district approved this and gave them 180 days to adopt equally protective ordinances. Due to staff turnover within the city, they were unable to meet that deadline and requested an extension, which was granted. The city has since been waiving permitting authority to the district on an individual basis. With additional turnover, the city has not amended their floodplain alteration, wetland protection, or stormwater management rules to be as or more stringent than ours. The city of Chanhassen no longer wishes to exercise sole permitting authority except for erosion control, as stated in the letter found in your board packet. Staff has determined that Chanhassen's erosion control ordinance aligns with our erosion control rule. So within the city of Chanhassen, the portion of the watershed, MCWD will have permitting authority for the rules mentioned previously, and Chanhassen will have erosion control as well as remain the LGU for the Wetland Conservation Act. Staff has reviewed the request and engaged with city staff and recommends that 11.1 be approved and formalized. Thank you, President White and Board of Managers, for listening. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to address those now.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you, Manager Olson. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll take a second for Manager Loftus. Any questions for Ms. Mendon?
Question.
Yes.
Okay, so we're still only permitting our specific area?
Yes, that's correct.
And do we coordinate with other water management organizations to make sure that all the rules are consistent?
That's a good question, Manager Olson. I'm going to defer that to Becky.
Manager Olson. We typically don't. It's up to each watershed to establish their own rules. And then in the situations where we have maybe permits that kind of straddle the border, we do coordinate in those cases to make sure that either that they are equally protective, or if they're not, then we would retain authority likely for the portion that's within our watershed. But in some cases, if it is equally protective, we might defer authority just for simplicity of
So
permitting
we
process.
use judgment calls as we work it, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you both. Item 11.2, Resolution 24031, authorizing the County Road 6 pond retrofit design contract. Ms. Cermak.
All right, good evening, President White, Board of Managers. Here tonight seeking authorization to award a contract to Stantec for the County Road 6 pond retrofit design and engineering contract, which we just wrapped up an RFP process for. I'm going to walk through some brief background on the project and the feasibility work we've done in 2023, and then I'll get into the RFP scope of work and the process and staff's evaluation. And we'll wrap up with staff's recommendation and our projected project timeline. So back in 1989, the district, with support from the MPCA, received Clean Water Partnership grant funds to conduct a diagnostic study of Long Lake and really to characterize and quantify why we were seeing declining water quality in Long Lake. The result of that work was the implementation of 4 projects that we refer to as kind of the Long Lake improvement projects of the 90s, one of which being the County Road 6 stormwater pond. The pond sits just south of County Road 6, just north of Long Lake. The pond itself is about 2.5 acres and fully sits inside a district-held easement. Fast forward to kind of more recent years, we still have quite a bit of water quality issues within the Long Lake subwatershed. This map here indicates the 5 lakes that have state impairments and established TMDLs. Following the TMDL establishment, we started to see some partnership formation to address the water quality issues at a more system scale. The district leaned in and kind of formalized its role as convener and lead in 2018, where we pursued and secured Bowser grant dollars to conduct kind of a full-scale, system-scale subwatershed assessment. The result of that technical assessment was our Long Lake Creek roadmap, where we've kind of documented each of the 5 management units, outlining the issues that are driving the issues, natural resource and water quality issues in each, and then the mechanisms that are driving those issues that we're experiencing, and then calling out strategies and specific opportunities we want to target for each of those geographies. In total, we recommended 34 projects within the Long Lake Creek roadmap, and they are categorized into those project buckets you see there. And this was really done just to help prioritize how we go about tackling those 34 projects, with regional treatment being prioritized in the near term due to its ability to treat a lot of nutrients in one project location, and letting these landscape projects kind of happen at the more local scale over time as kind of opportunities present themselves. And then we know to some degree each of these lakes is going to require internal loading management, whether that's through an alum treatment or in some cases rough fish management. The County Road 6 pond is one of the recommended regional stormwater ponds that we look into for retrofit. It's a great example of just the power of regional stormwater treatment. This map here kind of highlights the amount of drainage that comes through this pond. Over 70% of Long Lake's drainage area comes through the County Road 6 pond. And supporting the recommendation that we have in the roadmap was also kind of the monitoring work we had been doing in parallel. James mentioned at committee tonight the pond dredging study, which is how we realized that County Road 6 pond was under accumulating, so underperforming. We also have water quality monitoring in recent years showing that we're still seeing kind of elevated particulate phosphorus leave that pond. And so those things together led us to want to explore whether there was retrofit opportunities to optimize this regional stormwater pond. So we entered into feasibility in 2023 with Stantec. We evaluated in total 6 project concepts over kind of a suite of metrics you can see called out here. Based on our evaluation criteria, the primary recommendation that came out of that was the implementation of a gravity sand filter bench as kind of our most cost-effective solution. And as we continued conversations with Stantec, we realized that pursuing the earthen berm in conjunction with the gravity sand filter bench actually greatly reduces its capital costs and turns it into an additional cost-effective solution that we could stack with the gravity sand filter bench. So we brought this stacked concept approach in front of the board at committee in early March, where the earthen berm would serve here, shown in green, to kind of further define the 2 cells of the pond and encourage some additional settling in that first cell. And then the gravity sand filter bench, shown in yellow, is where a bulk of those removal, the phosphorus removal, would be coming from. We're projecting about 52 to 73 pounds of phosphorus removal. And to kind of put that in perspective, the pond right now is removing at about 30% rate, and we're looking to double that with this retrofit. In total, the project for design and construction with both concepts is projected to cost $728,000. You can see how that's broken out between the filter bench and that berm there. And we do want to forecast for the board that 728 is kind of our upfront current capital costs, but looking out ahead, there are maintenance costs that we need to forecast. We're projecting the need to replace the filter bench sand every 10 years at $200,000 a replacement. So that's where that kind of $1.3 million 30-year cost comes from. We then worked to develop an RFP and scope of work to support advancing the project into design. Again, the design budget is based off of that feasibility project estimate that we develop with a consultant. So in this case, our design budget for the project is $112,000. The RFP scope has 3 tasks, the first being 30, 60, 90% kind of typical design phases. Included in that is permitting support that we will need from the consultant as we go through that process. Task 2 is helping us develop the final specifications and plans we need to go out to bid, and then also providing bid period support. And then task 3 is construction oversight. And I want to note, we are not contracting for construction oversight tonight. That $112,000 is solely for task 1 and 2. But we do ask through the RFP process that they provide a cost estimate. We can use that to kind of gauge their project understanding and also gut check that we are kind of thinking about the cost of that appropriately. And so that will be coming back as an additional contract at the time that we would award construction bid. Brief look at the RFP process. The board formally ordered the project and approved the RFP release on March 28th. We distributed the RFP the very next day, provided an opportunity for consultants to submit questions that they had about the RFP, and also invited them to come to an optional informational meeting where we kind of answered those questions and provided some additional context and presentation about the project. Proposals were due on Monday, April 22nd, which then staff started their evaluation process, and that brings us to selection tonight. A bit more about the evaluation process. We received 3 proposals. The board does have access to those via separate cover that you received Monday afternoon. 3 proposals from Mergent, Ronnie Engineering, and Stantec. When we look at these proposals, we're really looking for, are they demonstrating a strong project understanding? Are they showing innovation and detail within their methods or approach? What type of project team are they putting together? And then, of course, cost is just one of the things that we consider when reviewing professional services proposal. We oftentimes use interviews in an RFP process as like another tool in our toolbox to potentially stress test a team's project understanding, gain clarity on deliverables or approach, or to differentiate between firms that were deemed similar during written proposal evaluation. And in this case, staff kind of unanimously deemed that interviews were not a necessary step in the selection process, and we felt comfortable bringing a recommendation forward on proposals alone. So that brings me to my recommendation of Stantec. They really demonstrated a thorough and clear project understanding through their entire proposal. We really saw that shine in the level of detail that they included within their approach. Specifically, I want to call out their kind of unique way of showing us how we are going to optimize the design. There are still a lot of design decisions to be made, and they showed us how we're going to use water quality modeling and hydraulic modeling to help make some of those design decisions. They also put a lot of thought into the range of potential permitting challenges we might run into with this project and how they're going to support and collaborate with the district throughout the project for that. They bring a strong project team to the table, many of whom were on the feasibility team, so familiar with the site, the models, and the design already. And lastly, they are within our projected design budget that we posted within the RFP. So with the assumption that we would award contract tonight, here's just a brief look, high-level look at the schedule. Looking to kick off in a few weeks and really get going on the design optimization and getting a really early start with the permitting conversations that we need to have. And then we would roll into 60 and 90% design later summer. Those are steps that we will be bringing plans in front of the board. So you can expect to see me back up here in August and September likely. With the thought that we would be ready to go out to bid in October and begin construction in January under frozen conditions. All right, so with that, we are requesting authorization to approve Resolution 24031, authorizing County Road 6 Pond retrofit design contract to Stantec. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt? Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando? Any questions? Yes.
I know you said staff decided not to do interviews, but could you give me staff's thoughts and analysis on it? Looks like there was about a 10% spread, and Stantec was about 13,000 more than the other bidders. How are we accounting for that?
Sure, Manager Loftus. Yep, cost is definitely something we want to look at right away and kind of compare there, but once we start opening the proposals, we want to see clear signs of what we're getting for those dollars. And in this instance, the low quote, we just weren't seeing detail that provided us confidence that we were going to be getting what we needed, and that number was kind of supported with a true deep project understanding of what it might take to get us there. So with Stantec, it was clear what we were getting for those additional dollars with the water quality modeling, mention of the hydraulic modeling, the detailed permitting support. So we felt confident in that decision.
And what about the middle? They were higher than the other proposer as well.
So Stantec actually fell in the middle. If you look at, I don't know if I can say names here, but in the supplemental material, the cost table reflects kind of the most accurate way to look at. Ronnie's proposal has some additional costs after that they're consulting out, but that they are planning to need. And so we've considered that as part of their kind of total proposal cost.
Okay, and you felt comfortable with just the written proposals versus interviews? Okay.
Manager Olson?
I noticed that in the now therefore, there's no number. Is that, shouldn't we be approving the number that they proposed?
President White, Manager Olson, and Lewis, please speak up but my understanding is that legally none of the proposals or the amounts are public until the board has made a decision. And so that's why the wording, you have access to the amount that you are approving via separate cover.
Okay. So are we going to then approve that at a later date? Or?
The wording, to my understanding, approves Stantec's contract for the amount that you have access to. And so that is the number we'd be
And
tied
when
to
does-
for
When
contract.
does that become public?
Madam President,
Mr. Smith?
that would become public upon execution of the contract.
Got it. Thank you.
What permits will be required? I'm sorry.
That's a great question. There's a few decisions that we want to make early on. They've called out the need to do a wetland delineation right away. The history out here is kind of interesting where Long Lake Creek is a public water. And now with the project being done in the 90s, we don't have a great understanding yet of how the DNR is going to view the pond. Whether now the pond is also part of the public water, or if it kind of separates the stream as the public water. So that's going to be one important decision on kind of the permits we will need. We're also looking at whether there is still some historic wetland present that used to be a wetland, so that wetland delineation will help us there. And then as far as district permits, with the addition of the berm and potentially adjusting the outlet structure, we might be looking at needing no-rise certifications to make sure that we are not, affecting water levels upstream and downstream. So those are kind of a few that,
Nothing simple.
yeah.
Manager Miller?
This is probably an appropriate question for a committee meeting, but I know this is before Long Lake, but this project and the Highway 12 project feeds into Tanger's Lake. How much phosphorus are the two projects pulled out altogether?
Manager Miller, what's the second project you're referring?
Highway 12 ponds, the old sewer facility.
I can't speak to the removal rates of that one offhand. So I'd have to get back to you on that.
Good.
I don't think anyone knows that one off.
I think it's pretty exciting. We're making these improvements to eventually Long Lake Creek and Tanger's Bay because Tanger's is such a mess. I think that we should kind of keep track of the cumulative impact that these projects are having on ultimately have on Tanger's Lake. But the Long Lake Creek into Tanger's Bay has some potential opportunities for improvement. I'd like at the next planning committee to have kind of an update on that if we could, to see if we could, if the board could take action to increase the potential for that project being moved ahead.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Anything else from the board? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Cermak.
Thank you.
Item 11.3, Mr. Heyman presenting his resolution 24-032 regarding East Auburn wetland.
Here we go. Good evening, Madam Chair and managers. Excuse me. Before you this evening with action item 11.3, seeking authorization to execute a contract with Moore Engineering for the East Auburn Wetland Restoration Project. I'm going to provide a brief background on the project itself and some of the results of the feasibility effort leading us into the design RFP, the proposals and evaluation that we conducted as we led towards the recommendation that the board will be considering this evening. So as a reminder, the project is located in the 6 Mile Creek Halstead Bay subwatershed and focuses on the East Auburn Wetland Complex in the city of Victoria. That wetland complex, which is circled in yellow, is the full or entire wetland system between Wasserman Lake and East Auburn Lake, with 6 Mile Creek flowing through the wetland north out of Wasserman Lake into downstream East Auburn Lake. Both of these lakes are currently listed as impaired. However, the district has invested substantially in the areas around Wasserman Lake and within the lake itself. And for the first time in monitoring history, which we've talked about recently, Wasserman Lake is meeting nutrient standards, state nutrient standards, signaling that it was time for the district to start focus on downstream water bodies. So the East Auburn impairment for excess nutrients is characterized in the TMDL and includes a numerical value of approximately 545 pounds of total phosphorus removal needed for East Auburn Lake to meet state standards. If we assume that Wasserman continues to meet state standard, we can quantify that load reduction and include the anticipated load reduction from the recently completed Victoria downtown stormwater retrofit, bringing that nutrient reduction need for East Auburn to about 358 pounds to meet state standards. So based on the TMDL and some of the 2017 watershed management plan work that we had completed, we recognized that the remaining reductions to achieve that goal would have to occur in upstream watershed projects, so loading into East Auburn Lake. So when you look at the drainage areas to the two water bodies, to Wasserman and then to downstream East Auburn, you can see that wetland complex is really the opportunity that contributes a substantial amount of the potential and also serves as a potential pilot wetland restoration project, as we identified in the watershed management plan, of needs of understanding wetlands as nutrient sources once they sort of reach their tipping point and start contributing nutrients to downstream water bodies. So dating back to 2020, the district did review available data and worked with research and monitoring to identify loading source by comparing the inlet and outlet of that entire East Auburn wetland system. The data really revealed that there was an increase in average phosphorus concentrations at the outlet of the wetland. And in terms of the loading, it was shown to be exporting approximately 135 pounds of phosphorus annually to East Auburn Lake. So understanding that as a potential wetland restoration opportunity, district research and monitoring staff began refining our understanding of that issue by honing in on the specific cells within the wetland to determine whether there was an area that we could focus our attention on. And the data really indicated that the first cell, which is the cell highlighted in yellow, and what we appropriately named cell 1, was responsible for the majority of phosphorus export, which is likely attributed to legacy phosphorus coming out of Wasserman Lake. So if we were to aim for that 135-pound loading contribution from the East Auburn wetland complex, we would take another significant bite out of that nutrient reduction needs for East Auburn Lake downstream. So looking at that data, it was clear that there was an export likely driven by this wet-dry cycling that occurs within the wetland during the summer months when the wetland dries out and then later experiences surges of flushing during rain events. And we really looked at answering a few questions through our feasibility process with an understanding that there appears to be high phosphorus levels in the soil. The soils are diffusing phosphorus into the groundwater, and that phosphorus-rich groundwater is able to transport downstream during surges within the creek. So with that in mind, and the history of the Cell 1 wetland relatively understood, we contracted with Moore Engineering and Wetland Solutions to conduct a feasibility study in 2023 that really utilized our understanding of the system and then went into reviewing data and literature on wetland systems, as well as modeling to understand what we could do to achieve downstream nutrient reductions through some sort of restoration within this wetland complex. And the feasibility study looked at 7 alternatives. Those 7 alternatives were grouped within the three overarching methods, which would be wetland or channel treatment, where we would treat some portion of the wetland or the channel, whether that's with sediment or some sort of binding material. It also looked at physical modifications, so would portions of the system be dredged? Would you eliminate the channel itself? So what opportunities would exist if you were to look at actual physical modification? And lastly, what would happen if we hydraulically restore or hydrologically restore the system through an outlet control structure? You've seen this image before, and it sort of ranks out what those alternatives look like once we start looking at a variety of metrics. So when you look at it visually, you start to see where these various methods rank in terms of their overall effectiveness, the risk, permitting complexity, operations and maintenance, construction costs. And really, when we look at this, we know that hydraulic restoration, although not the greatest in terms of the best opportunity to reduce phosphorus loading, if that were the single metric, it can reduce about 50%, but it comes with a variety of other substantial benefits. Less engineering complexity, there's very low risk in terms of hydrologically modifying, and in fact it would be restoring the wetland to a historic condition. There's a strong ability to mitigate any risk in doing something like this. It has very minimal impacts to the wetland. And frankly, as I noted, it's the only method that would restore it to its more natural state. So the design RFP that was developed, given the novelty of restoring nutrient exporting wetlands and our understanding of the complexity of the issue, we did draft the RFP with a direct aim at hydrologically restoring the wetland with a weir system between cells 1 and 2, and potentially providing some level of flexibility in that weir management. The goal is then to install the system, monitor the system then for approximately 3 years to see the benefit that we're achieving through that hydrologic restoration alone. And if there is an opportunity or a need to address additional phosphorus export downstream, we could revisit that in 3 to 4 years and have those other alternatives. One benefit to doing it this way is as we move through the permitting process, through design, we'll be able to gauge some of those agency partners in terms of what channel elimination or some sort of sediment treatment might look like from a permitting opportunity standpoint in the future. In anticipation of that RFP solicitation, we also spoke with the City of Victoria, who owns the wetland that the project is in, as well as the boardwalk trail that runs through the wetland between cells 1 and 2. And they had a desire to explore opportunities to potentially design and replace the boardwalk, seeing that there is heaving and some safety issues within the area. So the RFP does identify preliminary design needs for a potential boardwalk trail installation to be developed through 30% design, with the decision to advance that project fully once the cost and potential complexity, if there's any permitting considerations or others, are refined in the 30% design effort. And lastly, just to provide a little bit of spatial context, because we have talked before about what the water surface elevation might be, what some of the adjacent properties are looking like. So the board is aware before we move into design. First, the boardwalk between the two cells is only about 130 feet, so that's a relatively short boardwalk span, all things considered. We've installed bridge structures approximately that size across Minnehaha Creek on other projects, so it's not an extensive boardwalk system. So from a cost and complexity standpoint, we don't anticipate there being much in the way of challenges there. The elevations around the wetland itself, so the current channel is about 942 above sea level. So if we're speaking just in specific elevations from that being our base, we would expect to then raise or target the surface water elevation through this weir structure to about 944. So you're talking about a 2-foot pool from the bottom of the channel to what that surface water elevation is. For context, when you're looking at this image, the actual edge of the wetland's at about 946. So you're going to have a permanent pool or some semblance of a pool in the middle of this wetland through longer periods of the year, but you'll still have wetland fringe throughout, and you're not getting anywhere near the trail or any of the adjacent properties. The lowest adjacent property to the edge of their yard is about 952, so almost 10 feet from the current bottom of the channel, and 8 feet from where we would have that anticipated high water. And we're also looking at upstream Wasserman Lake flood elevations as well as no-rise certification, so making sure that what that permanent pool, the weir and the permanent pool, are not impacting upstream water bodies. And that was all really characterized in the scope of work in terms of the needs for exploration as we looked to deliver the RFP and receive proposals from consultants. We do have an overall project budget of $550,000 through feasibility. The design and construction of a weir structure, so hydrologic restoration, was substantially less than that, as well as then the design budget, which is derived from the feasibility effort, as well as what the anticipated construction costs are, was anticipated to be about $68,000. We did deliver the tasks or the task list in this RFP very similar to what you saw for County Road 6, but we break out 30% design as a first step because we knew we were moving towards a decision on that boardwalk trail first, then moving into your sort of standard 60-90 final plans and specs, as well as all of the permitting and other needs. As Kaylee had mentioned during the County Road 6 project, similarly, we do ask for construction oversight estimate through our RFP process. It isn't something that we contract for at this time. The district used to contract for construction oversight at the time of design. That became complicated once we actually moved through design because it doesn't always take into consideration what's actually going to be built. We would have challenges with some of the construction oversight estimates once we would get to active construction. So in recent years, we've pivoted our approach and started asking for those estimates. It gives us an understanding of what they think the construction complexities will be, how often we'll want oversight and construction admin services during construction, and then we actually contract for that when we go out for bid. Following the board action on March 13th, we did release the RFP, so I just sort of walked through briefly the scope of work on March 14th, and this just sort of highlights the various touch points we had with consultants with a request for questions near the end of March. We hosted an informational meeting in early April, had a deadline for proposals of April 10th. We did receive 3 proposals through that process. We narrowed that down to 2, which I'll touch on shortly, for interviews on April 23rd. We're now before you this evening with a recommendation. So the consultant proposals we received on that April 10th deadline were from Field to Flyway Engineering, ISG, and More Engineering. In the RFP, firms were advised that we would select a consultant based on proposed methodology, experience, and cost, and that the board may consider these factors as it chooses to select a consultant for the work based on its judgment. So to facilitate the effort, a team of 4 district staff evaluated the written proposals, and based on what you see in front of you in terms of the criteria, we looked at project understanding. So whether the team has demonstrated understanding of what we're aiming to achieve with the project, given the phase, the first phase, the potential for additional phases, complexities. Really clarifying what their methodology and approach would be. So that's the scope of work. That's what it's going to take to design and deliver the project in consideration of complexities and the goals of the partners. We look at their project team and experience. So do they have similar experience working on weir systems or other wetland restorations and projects? And finally, we do look at total design cost in consideration of the budget. And look to see if the expertise and identified scope of work really is the team to deliver the project. So as a callback to the board and its last meeting, the RFP is for professional services, which means it's not a low responsive bid process. And there was a little bit of a conversation about that with County Road 6. The board may consider a variety of factors in its decision, including the evaluation metrics we highlighted above, as well as just determine which consultant is best suited to deliver the work, given the complexity, experience, and some of the other considerations that we take into account. So following each of the consultant submittals review and scoring, 2 firms were selected for interviews. That was ISG and More Engineering. The interviews were conducted by project planning staff and were structured in a way that the selected firms would present their proposal, and then we would have an in-depth sort of question and answer session, which was conducted by staff with a focus on any gaps we identified in their proposal, their approach to the boardwalk effort, or if they had an understanding of how they would address that, potential challenges in delivering the project, such as permitting, geotechnical evaluation, site access during construction, things of that nature. And based on the proposal evaluation and interview process, staff is recommending More Engineering be awarded the design contract for the East Auburn Wetland Project. More has 2 partner subconsultants as part of its proposal. It has Higher Engineering and WSI, or Wetland Solutions. The interview was especially insightful for this process because of some of the complexity or uncertainty around the boardwalk and the geotechnical components. Moore really demonstrated a strong understanding of our goals, which makes sense. They were working with us through the feasibility effort, but they really honed in on the complexities of permitting the hydrologic restoration in a way that still achieves the goals. Maybe more importantly, or you know, what we found insightful was that higher engineering was actually a really notable addition to the team, and they demonstrated a really impressive understanding of the structural complexities of the weir structure and boardwalk system to deliver the project. They just really seemed like they'd taken this many steps further than I think some of the other proposals had been thinking about, which was refreshing to hear from their team and get to know that structural engineer themselves. So I think it was clear through that interview that these teams have a strong working relationship, which is always a consideration when we have multiple subs to one of our consultants. And you know, they've completed projects such as this in the past, and I think are really excited to work with the district in a way that is iterative and allows us to move through this 30, 60, 90 process, knowing there are some questions that remain with the boardwalk and what the weir system might ultimately look like. So assuming the contract approval this evening, project design will commence within the next couple of weeks. We have a targeted kickoff meeting of May 22nd, and from there we'll move 30, 60, 90 through the summer months with a September goal of approving 90% design. First will be at City Council, assuming there's a boardwalk component, or at a minimum needing some site access agreements, and then to the board by September 26th, which will allow us, excuse me, to prepare our final designs, specifications, and that bid package to go out in October and award late fall for a winter frozen conditions, maybe, construction in early 2025. So with that, staff recommends approving resolution 24032, authorizing execution of a contract with Moore Engineering for design and engineering services of the East Auburn Wetland Restoration Project in an amount not to exceed the amount set forth in the proposal, and authorize the administrator to execute contract amendments in his discretion up to 10% in aggregate of that contract amount.
Thank you, Mr. Heeman. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution? Manager, I'm surprised, Manager Olson, that you moved that. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Loftus seconds. Any questions for Michael? Manager Olson?
You said something that got my attention. I've been looking up here while you were talking. You said we've spanned bridges wider than that boardwalk?
Manager Olson, managers, I was just trying to make a note that about 130 feet is approximately or slightly, I mean, we're talking feet longer than the large vehicular bridge at the Minnehaha Preserve, the one that is designed to actually be moved at one point in time. The timber bridge there, I believe, was closer to about 95 feet.
Oh.
But my point was that, and actually what we heard through the interview process from higher engineering and others is, you know, this is actually a bridge spannable length, but oftentimes that can be pricey. It shouldn't preclude us from actually looking into that option before we decide on a boardwalk, which again was an interesting anecdote and something that I think just showed that they're thinking beyond, you know, there's a boardwalk now, but does it have to be? Is there a way to minimize impact or view the new weir system and what that looks like from a different angle or view? So it's something that we will certainly consider.
The brief amount of discovery I did showed that in some cases they can equal cost, bridge or boardwalk, because this will be completely rebuilt. We can't use anything that's there.
Right.
The other thing was that the idea that a bridge is similar to the one we have at Arden Park, you know, that type of an approach would be one spectacular addition. So I'm glad they're looking into it. And I'm not interested in something 10 times more expensive, but I'm glad to see that that's being considered. Thanks.
Yep.
Manager Miller?
I hate to keep on asking these questions, but Halstead's Bay, we've had a couple dozen projects now on 6 Mile Creek. What's the impact been, if it is, been measurable and cumulative on Halstead's Bay?
Boy, Manager Miller, that's a great question. I'd have to, ask our research and monitoring staff a cumulative impact to Halsted. We're certainly seeing it lake to lake, as you think of 6 Mile Creek as a flowage system, so moving from Pearson through Marsh, Wasserman, East Auburn, and on its way downstream. I'd have to, look into some of the data to see if they're seeing measurable impacts yet at Halsted, and even if they expect to, given the total loading that's making its way into the marsh, and then what we know the marsh is actually delivering to Halsted, which is where we're targeting a potential alum facility. I'm guessing that most of the impacts we're seeing are on the flowage lake-to-lake system, but that's certainly something we can look into and see if there's a...
So all the benefits in Scott County,
In Carver County,
Carver County.
thus far.
Okay. Well, let the record reflect that. I think it's important to keep some cumulative records on what impact we're having on Halstead's Bay, because it needs all the improvement it can get, and we're spending a lot of money, and if we want to be able to justify it with some numbers.
While Manager Miller's at it, you might want to add Jennings Bay to that effect, because those are the 3 that we always, so we have Tanager, Jennings, and Halsted. If we at any time would have a report that shows that we're having an impact, I think that would be a great goal.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, Manager Miller and managers, we do certainly track all of our project reductions and understand their effectiveness, but I think looking at cumulative downstream at each water body would be another way of seeing where the measurable impact is actually occurring in these focal geographies, in these watersheds.
How do we validate the numbers? Our research department is keeping those numbers current.
That's right, Manager Miller. And then as we start to develop new projects, like you see with whether it's Cottageville, which they were the ones who identified some of the challenges that we're having with that system, or as we design 325 Blake Road, or something like the East Auburn wetland restoration, you would have noted in their budget today, we work directly, the project planning group works directly with the research and monitoring group to identify effectiveness monitoring, what the time scale would be to gather enough information to make, to have a valid understanding of how well the project works, and then they can use that information and see whether there's actual downstream impact as well.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Thanks for the thorough recommendation.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next item is also Mr. Heeman presenting, is a discussion item regarding 325 Blake Road restoration and redevelopment.
Yeah, good evening, Madam Chair, managers. I think the update this evening will be rather brief. In anticipation of Alatus having their potential capital partner, Kane Anderson, visiting the site about a week and a half ago, we had expected maybe a bit more of an update this week. We were understanding that the Kane Anderson Capital Group would be making a recommendation through their committee and coming to visit the site, and then hopefully moving forward and would have more to talk about as it relates to a potential amendment to the purchase and sale agreement. Unfortunately, that visit was postponed due to some external circumstances, so we don't have a lot to report this evening. There are a couple of quick items as we await a status update from Alatus on its financial partner. The first is we did hear from Alatus yesterday that Kane Anderson is actually in town. They were arriving today and will be here until tomorrow. And we did receive an invite for a site walk tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. at 325 Blake Road, meeting at the Chorus Apartment Building. So we'll be sure to have staff there. I think James Whisker is going to be able to attend on behalf of the district for sure. I'm trying to juggle some things around, and then I don't know if Manager Maxwell was available or not, but I think we'll have representation there. Bring a couple of the boards that Alatus had requested just to show what our plans are for our portion of the project. And so that will be step one, or the first update I should note this evening. Second is we did request a liaison meeting with the City of Hopkins. Their staff have mentioned that they want to talk internally as to whether that would occur and on what timeline that might look like. So I don't have an update on when that may occur, but we are waiting to hear back from them, and hopefully we can get an update from them at tomorrow's site walk. I know staff and the mayor are anticipated to be at that site walk at 8 a.m. as well, and so that would hopefully be an opportunity to understand both who the Kane Anderson team is, as well as have a conversation with city staff and policymakers around getting together as partners to talk about next steps or the process, given some of the uncertainty that still remains around timing for the project, both the restoration and the redevelopment. And so with that, I can certainly take any questions the board may have. We should have more of an update, assuming that the Kane Anderson meeting goes well, and we do have an update scheduled with the Alatus and city teams for next Monday to discuss outcomes from this forthcoming Kane Anderson discussion. So.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Heyman? We'll look forward to the next iteration. Thank you very much. We already have, under board inquiries, issues, and ideas, questions about downstream cumulative effect of possible projects on Long Lake. Is there anything else that anyone would like to put on the list? Okay. Mr. Whisker, would you give us your report?
Sure thing. Okay, thank you, President White and managers. I think there's finally some news to report on water levels. As we all know, the watershed spent at least 24 months in fairly significant drought. We had an exceptionally warm winter with very little snowpack. We even had drought through March. I was looking at the DNR website regarding historic precipitation just this afternoon. And towards the end of March, we had received 0.9 of an inch of rain, 0.9 inches of rain, which is 0.3 inches less than the driest year ever recorded. Fast forward to now, we've received 8.7 inches, which is almost a third of the rain that we would receive in a year. So a pretty big swing in a pretty short amount of time. And we're only 4 inches away in terms of this time bound, not total accumulation. Right now, we're only 4 inches away from the wettest year on record. So it's a great example, I think, of the climate-driven boom-bust cycles of precipitation. A lot changed in a very short period of time. So we saw water levels rebound across the watershed rather rapidly at the end of April. The lake received 14,000 acre-feet of water in a month. It came up a foot to 929.6, which is 0.2 above the ordinary high water in a very short amount of time. So to create storage ahead of what was forecasted to be 3/4 of an inch of additional rain just over this last week, the creek discharge was increased briefly up to 275 cubic feet per second. Since then, we've ramped things down back to 150, moving water from the upper watershed the lower watershed on a time basis to avoid flooding downstream, drive towards paddling conditions, and manage back slowly to have the lake track towards ordinary high water level of 929.4. So we did see the creek peak at Hiawatha at 225 cubic feet per second, about 50 cubic feet per second less than dam discharge because there's plenty of storage in the creek system coming out of the drought. We've started to see, based on the gauge data this afternoon, the creek discharge slowly recede down at Hiawatha. So we're expecting flows, like I said, to track back towards safe paddling conditions, with Minnetonka slowly falling over the next week, weather pending towards ordinary high water level.
When you let out a lot of water over the dam, and it goes over the banks in certain places and fills in the wetlands, isn't that kind of like storing water and restoring the aquifer? So there's some good of having a large flow because it fills in the.
Right. It's great observation and a great question. I think, streams in a highly natural environment are designed to move sediment and water through the landscape, and as a result, they flood periodically, and that drives ecosystem health. Access to the floodplain for the creek, and that didn't happen in this event. Everything was largely in channel. You know, there are pocket areas around the creek, I think like Big Willow. Obviously, our project down by the preserve is designed to come out of banks. We wanted the creek in that space to have contact with its historic floodplain. And that saturation in the floodplain revitalizes plant life and provides aquatic habitat. It also has this effect of pushing water. It creates head and pushes water down into the superficial aquifer that's right there. And that's something that we've obviously been very interested in up and down the creek corridor historically. Because in some areas of the creek, groundwater is, you have what's called gaining reaches, where groundwater discharges into the creek. And there's other sections of the creek where you can lose to groundwater rather quickly just due to the geology. And so one of the things that we're interested to see is part of the ResNet system that Brian's implemented with the stations up and down the creek, and some of the additional funding that we've gotten recently from FEMA and others, is integrating groundwater sensors or nested wells, you know, up and down. And so we're going to be able to see, at least in certain locations, what the head difference is between what's in the well and what's in the creek. And if you can see the groundwater level coming up, you know that you're recharging the groundwater in that location. And when the creek's low, you're going to be able to see discharge into the creek. So that's been, again, that sort of missing component. So there was, you know, we have had storage in the upper watershed. The upper watershed, while we had a lot of rain coming into the lake, it's been interesting to watch that too. Because the hydrographs have really kind of plateaued and receded. The discharge coming in's been, you know, rather slow. And that's because there is a lot of storage, not only in the basins that we can see, but in the ground. So good question.
Well, a follow-up question, maybe it's not as intelligent, but if we've got these wetlands that are, I'll call them non-maintained, they're full of logs and other stuff where it decreases the volume. Is there any, do you think there's any measurable benefit of cleaning up logs and all the other debris in these wetlands along the creek to increase the capacity? Maybe not measurable, I presume.
Well, I think my gut reaction, which is a non-scientific answer to a non-scientific question, is probably not. I think there are certain locations where, you know, depending on, we've talked about this before, depending on the flow regime, if you had wetland excavation, you are obviously creating storage. We did that with some success at Methodist Hospital, where we were able to scrape part of a wetland, restore the hydrology there, and it created enough storage between normal water level and 100-year water level that it offset them being reduced from the floodplain. So there are locations where that's going to work. In terms of, you know, logs and debris and stuff, probably imperceptible.
Well, I'm thinking down at Pamela Park.
Oh, sure.
You know, that outlet from Pamela into the creek is a mess.
Yeah.
It's just.
And there's certain locations where it may back water up, you know, I think that there's some probably real localized conditions that we wouldn't understand without getting out there and looking at it. But that's a good example.
Thank you.
Is that more about creating a dam than it is occupying space?
I don't, you know, I'm not a scientist or environmentalist. I'm just an observer. I have no idea. It just strikes me as something that we should know about.
Any other questions about water levels today, Bill?
Well, I just harken back to how we were started. We didn't exist in 1966. And in 1967, we had a heck of a flood in Minneapolis. So the motive to form our watershed district was flood control. And oh, by the way, water quality is a great thing to have along with that, because if you're going to put a dam in, you got to be worried about how the quality of the water is. So if we were founded on flood control, that's a big deal for us. And the decisions that we've been making on running that dam have been very popular in the last 5 years. We've been publishing to those people living on the creek, you know, why we're opening, why we're closing, and why we ratchet it up and ratchet it back. In discussions I've had so far this year with a couple of the marinas, are grateful that with this, quote, drought, we've maintained their lake level so they don't lose slips in their marina. So they like a big lake, and with dry weather, they were concerned that we would drain their lake. So, from that perspective, we want to keep those folks happy. The other thing is that we can't let it get too high. If we get it too high, everybody's going to have wet shoes walking to their boat. So, we experienced that back in 2014.
Yeah.
So I just really appreciate you and your staff being very attentive to this, because it's a big part of our economy out here, and a lot of people think about us when that is doing fine. Okay, so
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. One of the things I think is important is, Tiffany's transitioned and we have a whole team built around this now. We're really digging in. It's kind of exciting. She's got us to a real kind of platinum level of service. And as we've dug in, there's still tons of meat on the bone for doing the job even better and communicating about it better. So I think the team's really jazzed up about that. And one simple thing that I want to kind of inject into how we're communicating about this is we don't manage the creek for lake level or creek level. We're managing the dam based on the amount of rain that we're predicted to get. Rain is the input. And I think that part of our kind of language and lexicon has been we're managing based on a certain lake level, because the operating plan says when the lake gets to this, you can do that. And so part of our communications have been, well, when the lake gets to here, we're going to have X as a discharge. But that's not really the driver. The driver is the predicted amount of rain that's falling from the sky and how it's going to impact downstream flood conditions first, recreational conditions, ecological conditions for base flow, and what it's going to do upstream for all those same things: recreation, ecology, flooding. And so we're not managing it for the lake or the creek. We're managing it based on the amount of water that we're going to get. So.
Valid point, thank you.
Shifting gears here a minute, the Citizens Advisory Committee, we had a Citizens Advisory Committee alumni, Bill Bushnell. I don't know if folks remember him. He always liked to say he's one of our longest serving CAC members. He recently reached out and shared with the team information about the Minnesota Bush Prize, which recognizes innovative nonprofit or government organizations that are highly valued within their communities and have a track record of successfully solving community scale problems, which kind of sounds like us. So some of the evaluation criteria include innovative problem solving, meaningful collaboration, partnership. And so giving the board a heads up that I've circulated this to our outreach team, and they've looked into it and think that this is a worthy pursuit. So we're planning on submitting an application for the award. It would highlight our creative approach to capital project implementation and our focal geographies, our community partnerships, as well as our go forward plans to engage the cities in climate action planning. So application deadline's May 31st. I think they're reviewed June to August, and then they'll announce winners in the fall. And we'll see how we do. We're not doing it for the prize, but there's actually a financial prize of up to $500,000 or 25% of your last fiscal year expenditures, whichever's with a not to exceed of $500,000. So we're going to be chasing that. And then I think to round things out tonight, I mentioned this during committee. I want to talk a little bit about Alex, and we'll invite him up, I think, to say his farewell, if he's still here. Didn't leave yet. So I'll say a few words, and I'll just turn it over to Alex. But he and I have spent a lot of time talking. We've talked at length, I think, about his upcoming departure to the city of St. Paul. Most of the first 5 conversations we had is do you really have to go? And we've talked about it with the program managers too, I think sometimes emotionally. And for today, I just want to kind of keep it focused and short and sweet, and just reiterate our deepest gratitude for just the immense positive impact that Alex has had on all of us as an organization. When he arrived, we were in pretty rough shape in terms of technology. We like to joke around. We did have GIS. It was on a flash drive in a fire safe, all of our little layers. So we weren't really GIS capable. We had an outdated network, our server was constantly down, we didn't really have great Wi-Fi connections, we had limited remote capabilities, like I spoke to GIS, really no focused data management systems. I think we were managing permitting in a SQL database that an intern had built in like 2007. So it was rough around the edges. And he quickly assumed full responsibility after our operations manager left for developing a strategic IT plan. And IT is hard to understand for a lot of people. And Alex made that really clear for everybody. He took a lot of the confusion out of it and said, here's all the things that we need to do in this order in order to take us from where we were to the functioning organization that we wanted to be. And he did that at the same time migrating the entire organization in like a 12-day window to remote work during a pandemic, being essentially a pretty new on the job. And I think since then we've improved every aspect of our network and our IT. He's implemented a GIS enterprise, which integrates all of the data that we have and collect, from research and monitoring to permitting to our wetland and stream data, new data sets that we're creating, as well as all that outside data, land use, parcel data, storm sewer data, into a central hub that everybody in the organization has access to for analysis, map making, communications. And that work has helped us, I think, more than the board sometimes sees. That was really at the center of making our proposal to the city of Minneapolis. Over the cube wall, we worked really iteratively to kind of figure out how are we going to tell the story visually. And I think we won some hearts and minds down in Minneapolis with Alex's GIS-based storytelling. We, I think, got the policymakers and the public to understand the impact of old land use decisions from filling all the wetlands, which made its way into strip stories and become kind of a central talking point. And it got all the policymaker support we need for our partnership proposal. I mean, when I present that stuff, it's just 20 slides of Alex's maps with all of his data-driven insights as talking points. And that's something I worked really hard on. I've been really passionate about Minneapolis, and it's been really fun knowing that the only reason we made that happen is being able to tell that story so clearly. So we've talked a lot about that. And you know, our data management systems, whether it's permitting or some of the other ways that we're storing, integrating, and analyzing data, we've just taken leaps and bounds forward. And I think, as we say with all of our top impact players, though, it's not really the work, it's the person. And Alex has just had a huge imprint on the team and the culture in a really positive way that I think is going to last. He's pushed staff consistently. He's got this great work plan about being a data-driven culture. So I see him pushing people all the time to lean into the curiosity, find these new pockets of data, and get curious about the numbers, and let's tell some stories from the numbers. I think one of his guiding principles aligns perfectly with our organization's guiding principle of service. I think in 6 years, I have never, ever seen Alex say no to anybody, to the point where Becky and I have had to pull him aside and say, you got to say no. Like, stop saying yes to everything. But he wears opportunity goggles, and anytime somebody comes to him, it's always like, I could probably figure that out. I could do that. And it all goes into the queue and usually gets done faster and better than what anybody would have ever expected. And he's just been a great teacher. You know, he's taught us all how to use the stuff that he has built. And that was a huge thing that we talked about, is the change management. Because you can build it and they won't always come when it comes to technology. There's late adopters like me. And so, you know, making sure people knew how to leverage what we've built has been transformational, because we could have just built it. But people are really using the tools that he's created. So it's been an amazing run. We call it the Steel era. Alex has been at the helm, and I couldn't be happier for him to take it to the next level, and more sad for us. But I wanted to say again, a deep thank you for all the time that you've dedicated to driving us forward, and wish you the very best in your next endeavor over at the City of St. Paul. I'm sure you're going to transform what they're doing too.
Appreciate it. Thank you, President White, managers.
As you now know and we've talked about, I've accepted the role of to be the GIS lead for the city of St. Paul, which is a big leap in my career trajectory and more closely aligns my professional goal with my professional goals, and I think allows me to bring focus and create impact at a larger scale. So it was an opportunity that just can't really pass up, but the decision still was very difficult to make, and I think that's because of everybody in this room and the work we do and how we do that work. So over 5 years ago, I think I started as a bright-eyed, hopeful, perhaps sometimes in over my head technician, and I'm leaving here as a confident and experienced impact player, collaborator, and teammate. And in between all that, I think there's been a ton of growth. Learned a lot about myself, became comfortable with being uncomfortable, figured out how I can best lead, and figured out the value that I can bring. And that's because of many of the folks here. And specifically, I want to shout out 2 of them. Becky left, but this can be for the record and the minutes. But she's just created a space for me to figure out my approach, what my leadership style is, how I best show up, and she always encouraged me to lean into my strengths. And from her, I'll take away a continuous drive towards clarity, while somehow also being comfortable with swirling ambiguity. And secondly, James. James sees the potential in people often before they see it in themselves, and I'm not an exception to that. He saw potential in me, and he always created the space, provided mentorship and guidance, and helped me realize that potential. So from him, I take away a pride in embracing my unique leadership style, a drive to imprint on big decisions, and a recognition for the importance of culture. This is a very unique place, full of really driven, smart, talented, caring people that are doing really important work. I don't think many other organizations of our size would even attempt, let alone accomplish what the Watershed District is able to do. So I want to thank you as well as managers for leading this organization, asking the tough but really great questions. And it's just been an honor to be a part of this organization. So thank you.
Alex?
I think I got goosebumps.
The last couple of years, I've sat as a liaison on some complicated technical stuff, had no idea what was going on. There was some great comfort every time Alex would be in the room. That things were under control and that it made sense. I mean, it was just, I don't know, you got some kind of a halo around you about technicalities. But it was just so reassuring that when we went off to some crazy movement that was the latest gimmick, but that it was grounded in really useful functioning for the agency, and really appreciate that. You don't know how much comfort you gave to the Board of Managers, knowing that you were involved in whatever it was, not just your technical stuff, but helping guiding other people doing their regular work. And it's really, wish you all the luck in the world in St. Paul. That'll be a new environment for you. But I'm sure that you'll make the same impact there that you did here. I really
Thank you.
appreciate your work.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Go ahead, Jessica.
I wanted to thank you as well. I think it's been a joy to see your work, and I've heard so many of your colleagues mention you whenever there's a great success. Alex did this, Alex did that. So 1,000%, I'm not surprised by James mentioning that you're a yes guy, and I think you're a huge help to everyone around you. And I've seen you pick up projects that are struggling and carry the weight, and get things over the finish line. And really appreciate it, and you're gonna continue to do great things. And their gain is definitely our loss, so come home whenever you're ready to come back.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
Yeah, I was gonna say that consistently, we have succeeded when it came to the need for IT and the need for a new website and the need for GIS and the need to justify 2D modeling and all those things that you've been working on. And I am really looking forward to approving Alex's side hustle contract. In case we need his help once in a while, because that an hour at a strategic moment might be really beneficial to us, because there's so much history there. But I really appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I am so pleased that St. Paul is going to benefit now, because they're going to really appreciate the help.
Yeah, thank you very much for all your hard work, and you've come a long way from 5, 6 years. We did a lot of stuff, and thank you very much for all that. I think maybe you should turn yourself into the AI conference. We could artificially intelligence you and we just keep
Duplicate
Too
him?
kind.
Put yourself on a flashback.
keep
Fire
hearing.
safe.
Do what you do, and where's Alex? It was right there.
It's in the box.
Yes, we have no bananas.
Alex, thank you for your technical contributions to this organization. Very well done. On a personal note, you and your bride continue to travel and enjoy that too.
Of course.
And I get the last word. When a while back, I was at a CAC meeting, attending as the board liaison, and I said, we just made a decision that was not a very high monetary decision, but it was enormous, that we had bought the software that let us really do the GIS work, and that wouldn't have happened without you. It was a very important bridge for us to get from one level to another. You have been unfailingly helpful and pleasant and so smart. It's been wonderful to have you here. Good wishes.
Thank you so much.
One thing I really appreciated is he tolerated ignorance.
Daily. Lots of it.
Across the cube.
Maybe he went back and yelled afterward. Wish you all the best, dear.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
You deserve it.
That's
Meeting is
it. We're
adjourned.
ending on the high or low note, depending on how you look at it.
Bittersweet.
Palm Beach.
On to a new career.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.